We all knew this was likely coming, but the league made a proposal to players on Saturday to try to spur negotiations and end the lockout, but the players came away from it, quote, disappointed, and spring training was supposed to kick off today. Pitchers and catchers were supposed to report today, so spring training is officially delayed, and we'll talk about it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes 3 days a week until the lockout ends, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well, so check us out there if you have not already. And by the way, we're 5 days a week as soon as the lockout ends, so yet another reason to hope for the end of the lockout. And coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about the fact that spring training is officially delayed because Giants pitchers and catchers were supposed to report today, but obviously that is not going to happen. The lockout is still in full effect. The owners made a proposal on Saturday, and we talked last week about how this was a critical moment in the lockout because basically we've had a lot of back and forth. Not much has happened. The league, Rob Manfred had a press conference late last week and said it was going to be a big proposal. It was going to get things moving and the players should like it, but the players came away from it not happy. And if we look at the details of the league's offer, it's not hard to see why the players came away from it unhappy. It's just a continuation of the way the league has negotiated all along, which is tiny incremental movement. And then if they give something, they're also adding something else that the players aren't going to like. So it was just more of the same. And I'm not here to say who's right and who's wrong. I mostly just want to talk about what was proposed and why the players don't like it. So let's just talk about what was proposed. Basically, like I said, just small incremental movement on some of the key issues. For example, the pre-arbitration bonus pool. Basically, as it is now, players who are not yet eligible for arbitration they're just eligible to make the league minimum. Teams can be generous and pay them more than that. Often it's slightly more than that, but until you reach arbitration, you're just not really making serious money in baseball. And so the idea here with this pre-arbitration bonus pool is to, have some money from MLB Central revenues that goes to pre-arbitration players based on performance. And both sides fundamentally have agreed to this idea, but they're fighting over the amount that would be a part of the bonus pool. And initially, the players proposed $105 million in this pool, and the league countered with $10 million. So then the players made in their latest proposal, they changed it to $100 million from $105, so almost no movement there. And then the league in this proposal on Saturday moved from $10 million to $15 million. Very clearly an intentional movement of the same amount that the players had made. But so they're still very far apart, with the league offering $15 million, the players asking for $100, $85 million separate them. The midway point, by the way, would be $57.5 million. So, hey, why don't they hire me? I'll just come in there and say, gentlemen, $57.5 million, meet in the middle, done, spring training starts today. But no, they don't work that way. And I mean, what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to go $5 million at a time until we reach $57.5 million. What is the point of that? But that's how these negotiations have gone. Neither side seems highly motivated to get a deal done. They mostly seem highly motivated to get a deal that would be a big win for them. And so that's where we are. I mean, so the players haven't necessarily agreed on what their next step is going to be, and even whether they should make a counter proposal. And they're obligated to continue to negotiate, but if this is how it's going to be, then that's a problem. And so far, that is how it's been. So there were also slight modifications to the league's competitive balance tax threshold offers. So currently, as it is now, the CBT, the luxury tax, begins at $210 million, and teams start getting taxed on any dollars they spend above that. The players want this to be moved into the $260 million range. They want penalty-free spending up to that amount, a big increase from where it is now. The league is proposing $214 million, just a $4 million increase, which doesn't even keep up with current rates of inflation. And in this offer, or previously, they proposed a limit of $214 million in 2022, 2023, and 2024, increasing it by $2 million to $216 million in 2025 and $220 million in 2026 when the collective bargaining agreement, the new one, would expire. So on Saturday, they retained that $214 million number for the first 2 years. In the third year, instead of 214, they said 216, and then they said 218 and 222 in the final 2 years of the deal. So again, very slight movement. The players have been looking for a threshold in the 245 to 260 million dollar range for the 5 years covered by the deal. So once again, there's, I guess, agreement on the principle. Obviously, we have the luxury tax, and they're both working within keeping the luxury tax, but they're just disagreeing on the numbers. But it also must be said that the league, this is one of those examples where they're quote unquote giving something up by increasing these levels, even though it's very modest, but they're adding new elements to the luxury tax that make it kind of worse. In their earlier proposals, they were saying that teams that exceeded the luxury tax would surrender a third-round draft pick, and then the penalties for exceeding certain levels above the luxury tax were harsher than they are today, increasing to $50 million 50% in the first tier, 75% in a second tier. I don't know exactly what the range was, and then 100% tax above a certain number, and that's much, much higher than those numbers are today. And so it's arguable that this is a worse CBT proposal that the league is making compared to the old one. So that is why the players aren't happy. But in this proposal on Saturday, the league did drop that draft pick compensation or draft pick loss by teams exceeding the luxury tax, but they're still proposing a 50% tax in the first tier, and I assume the same 75% and 100% in the next tiers. So easy to see why the players are frustrated by this offer that was made on Saturday. So coming up next, we'll talk about some of the other details of this proposal, and we're going to talk about the league's response. We'll also talk about some news regarding minor leaguers and minor league rights and minor league pay, which is a big topic that we frankly haven't dived into enough on this show, but we'll touch on that coming up next as well. But first, it's that time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions. Not this year, though. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Truly unbelievable. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. Yes, you heard me right. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You might be thinking, how on earth is that going to go hand in hand with my New Year's resolution to eat better? Well, let me tell you, most Built Bars contain just 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs to go along with 17 grams of protein. Truly an amazing feat given the delicious candy bar-like flavor of Built Bars. So you can go to BuiltBar.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure the often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning? Is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? And wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the exact same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Random example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from a chain store and just $216 from Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every single customer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. All right, as promised, we are going to continue talking about the league's proposal on Saturday, why the players rejected it, where things stand with the lockout, as we are now officially in a spring training delay, as we, frankly, since the beginning of the lockout and even before it, talked about as a very likely outcome. And so we're not yet to the point where the regular season is like inevitably going to be delayed, but we're a couple of weeks away from that. And again, I would bank on the regular season being delayed. That's how far apart these two sides are. And that's the only thing that's really going to motivate them when there's really fire beneath their feet. That fire is going to be missed games because the players won't be getting paid. Like, the reality of missing paychecks is going to be a motivating factor. And for the league, there's a lot of money that obviously comes in when you have games. So we'll need about 4 weeks of spring training. We'll need a little bit of a lead up period to spring training. So with the season scheduled to begin on March 31st, we still have a couple of weeks until the regular season is in. The start of the regular season starts to be not just in doubt, but inevitably delayed. And so we're not there yet. Today is kind of the official marking of the delay of spring training, and we march on with this lockout. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So yeah, continuing through the kind of what was in the league's proposal on Saturday, there was more with the minimum salary. The league minimum salary has been a topic of conversation between these two sides in these negotiations. The league made two proposals on Saturday, one of them involving a flat amount of $630,000 for all pre-arbitration players. This is up from, I think it's right now like $570,500 is the minimum salary. So a substantial increase of about $60,000. The second proposal involved a tiered system with players making $615,000 until they reach 1 year of service time, $650,000 for between 1 and 2 years service time, and $725,000 for those between 2 and 3 years of service time. This is only a slight modification of the previous proposal in which the tiers were $615,000, $650,000, and $7,000. So I guess the only difference is actually the third number. The first two are the same. So the third number increasing from $700 to $725. So, I mean, this is an area where I think I can see them mostly agreeing. I think the players have proposed something in the $700,000 range, maybe a little bit more than that, for all pre-arbitration players. And of course, the bonus pool would be for certain players in these tiers, but they would be eligible for more by their performance on the field. So I think fundamentally these are like good ideas. It's just a matter of agreeing on the money. But there are also other issues as well something new that we've kind of heard about from this last proposal was that the league is proposing a limit on how many times a player can be optioned. So I think this is a concession. This is something the players want and has been in previous proposals that they've made. We just haven't really seen it reported much. But the players have proposed a limit of 4 options per season, which I think would be a good idea. There is frankly too much sending up and down, and this would be a big strategy change, and it would affect the Giants a lot. They're one of those teams that uses options liberally, and so if you limit a player's number of options, there could be a benefit to that. Although I'm sitting here thinking, well, it also could motivate a team not to call a player up because they don't want to burn an option because there's a limited number. So maybe a prospect, whereas right now there's maybe no kind of downside because you can always send them down and bring them up and send them down. But if there's a limit of, say, 4, you got to be careful about when you use them. But still, 4 is plenty. To option someone more than 4 times in a year is mostly just kind of gaming the system, as opposed to, I just don't think there's any real reason other than to take advantage of kind of cycling through more players onto your roster, which the Giants have done and done well, and it's helped them. So this would be a significant change and something they would work around just fine, in my opinion. But it would be something that would change the way that they kind of manage their roster. So there's currently no limit on how many times a player with options could be shuttled between the majors and the minors. And teams have increasingly taken advantage of this non-rule by constantly moving pitchers back and forth from AAA to always ensure fresh relievers are available for in-game maneuvers. While a 5-option cap would still allow teams quite a bit of flexibility, it would cut down on extreme situations like the Rays recalling and demoting right-hander Lewis Head 12 times last season. So this is something, the players proposing 4, the league proposing 5, it's not hard to see them ultimately agreeing, although Evan Drellick says that the 5-option cap comes with some yet unknown strings attached. So this is just yet another example of the league. Whenever they give something, they add something on top of it that the players aren't going to want. And that must be very frustrating to negotiate with, but that's how the league has kind of moved through these negotiations. And then they'll say, look, we gave in this area, but then there's always something else. And so it's not hard to see why the players are frustrated. And it also is hard to see these two sides coming to any kind of an agreement anytime soon. And so it is going to be interesting to see what happens next, because, your gut reaction, or just the standard kind of reaction, would be that the players are in line to make a counter proposal. But we've had rumblings that after previous league proposals, some players have felt like those proposals were so bad they didn't even warrant a counter proposal. So it'll be interesting if we don't fall into that pattern right here and the players do decide not to make a counter proposal. But that's similar to what the league did last time. After the players made their proposal, the league said, okay, we'll make a counter. But then a couple days later, they said they won't. And then they said they were going to seek federal mediation. They did seek it. The players rejected it. And then the league said, okay, fine, we'll make a counter proposal. So it'll be interesting to see what the players do next, and if they decide to take some more extreme measures than simply making another counter proposal where they move $5 million in the pre-arbitration bonus pool. It's just extremely frustrating as a fan. It is important to keep in mind that as of yet, the season is still set to begin on March 31st, and it's possible that it will. So normally nothing really would be happening this time of year anyway. So while it's frustrating that they're in a lockout and that transactions have been frozen and all that, I'm not yet going to be like really upset. I think once we start missing games and it becomes inevitable that we're going to miss games, I'm going to personally take a harsher tone on this. But as of yet, there's really nothing that's been lost. And today being the start of spring training, or what was supposed to be the start of spring training, I just feel like This is the real first milestone of the damage caused by this lockout. I mean, I think there's been damage done from a PR perspective anyway, but to actually start missing concrete things for the baseball season is a big deal. And so that's where we are today. So coming up next, as I said, we'll wrap this up and we'll talk about some of the minor league stuff that's been going on. We've got some reports about this class action lawsuit against Major League Baseball and some of the stuff that was said and some of the kind of crazy reports coming out of these legal hearings. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam and both pro and college hoops are as well. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance, props, to where to find to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. And of course, baseball as well. Once that gets going again, we'll be talking a lot about baseball betting opportunities at betonline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to wrap up this discussion, talk about what's going on with minor league rights and kind of this class action lawsuit. Just a lot going on. It is good news, in my opinion, that this conversation is getting louder and louder, and it's kind of become more mainstream that people are aware of what's going on with the minor leagues and minor league pay. For a long time, this was kind of a fringe group that was advocating for minor leaguers. We all kind of knew it was happening. Nobody really, I don't want to say nobody really cared, but that's frankly, like, most people just didn't really care. It was easy to write it off because not a lot of people were talking about it. It was one of those things. I mean, it's a weird analogy that's coming into my head, but climate change in the early days, right? Like, we hear about it, people are talking about it, and yet nobody cares. Nobody does anything. But then over time, the conversation gets louder and louder, and maybe the analogy is that today with minor leaguers is kind of like today with climate change. It's become much more mainstream. People are aware of it, and people are doing more about it than they used to. So that's kind of what's going on right now. And they've won some rights. There's going to be housing for minor leaguers. The league is going to provide it. We've heard from advocates for minor leaguers that they're not quite happy with what the league is doing exactly because there are some loopholes, but still, it's undeniable that it's a step in the right direction. There was also an increase in pay going into 2021, with the minimum salary for AAA players going up to $16.8 thousand, AA to $14.4 thousand, Class A at $12,000, Complex League at $9.6 thousand, and Dominican Summer League at $3,000. So that was an increase, a pretty substantial increase. I don't actually have the old numbers pulled up, but I know it was a big deal at the time. Those are still low amounts, right? Like, for trying to live off of that. And then the kind of argument is that this is a year-round job. You can't just slack off and let your body waste away in the off season. You've got to keep in shape, and ideally you're training and working with instructors and getting better in the off season, but they're not paid in the off season. And as we saw with those salaries, you got to continue to work in order to survive and sustain life and a family and live and have a place to live. So it's a problem. And currently what's going on in this class action lawsuit is they're fighting about, I think the whole class action lawsuit is about this. I'm not entirely sure. Honestly, it's something I need to dig into more. But what we've heard in recent days is about minor leaguers not being paid during spring training. And the comment that stood out the most was in an article by Evan Drellick in The Athletic over the weekend or late last week, saying that Major League Baseball hired was it a lawyer? They hired somebody at a rate of $775 per hour to investigate what players were gaining from being at spring training. And that person concluded that it is the players who gain like $2,200 a week by being at spring training, and the teams only just incur the cost of providing that training, and they don't really get any value out of it. So the league is just fighting tooth and nail to not have to pay minor leaguers, and they don't want to pay them for spring training, and they call it a benefit to the players and not something that they should have to pay for. So it's not a good look, and kind of universally, I think people don't like this when they see stories like this come out, but that's where we stand, and it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're seeing during the negotiations. The league is just stingy. The league is penny pinching and just willing to fight for every last inch in order to save as much money as possible. That's what it seems like, and they're willing to sacrifice their workforce. They just don't seem to really value their workforce, is what it seems like to me and to a lot of observers. So that's where we stand, and that is all the time we have for today. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it, leaving a review, liking, commenting, subscribing, all of that good stuff. So thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Anyway, I can't wait to be with you again 2 more times this week. Thanks again for listening. Stay Locked On Giants.